Under which law? Is this a right there? Got this. It's the indignity of it all. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Roy Gott. A few of you have been to this presentation before over at the rec center in Gouldsboro. We do have a Zoom option running right now. There's not many people on it, but we are recording it and will be on the YouTube channel later once we get a chance to upload it. So, Kendra Joe, you're on there, and so for the Zoom people, I just asked them to put their name in the chat so we get a count of who's in here, and at the back we have a sign-up sheet that I would ask everybody to just sign in. If you want to leave your contact information, we'll get and send more information to you as it becomes available. But we do want to try and just get a count of how many people showed up tonight, so that helps us show the community engagement for the project. So again, my name is Roy Gott, along with Bob Bastinto here. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Scudic Peninsula Broadband Committee. We also have Mike Summerer and Sandy Porton with us tonight. They are all members of your two communities. I live in Franklin, but I work at the Scudic Institute. I'm the IT manager there, and that's how I became involved in this process. And so really, we're just trying to report out tonight again on what we've done so far over the course of the last year and a half as a combined committee of the two towns, where we're looking to go forward from here, and what may be possible for you folks to do to help that effort a little bit as well. So there is some food at the back. I know the pizza's been a big hit so far. There's some sandwiches. I would encourage anybody when they are leaving to go grab some more food and take it with you, because I don't need it myself. Have a beverage, bottled water, chips, cookies, so please help yourself. And I guess the restroom is over here if anybody needs it. Probably a lot of you over there too. Okay, and don't trip on the cord here. So if anybody does, that'll probably be me. So let's get started. We're going to start with the basics of broadband internet, because we're not sure where everybody is on this, but basically broadband is high-speed internet access. It's not a specific type of internet service. It's measured by download and upload speeds. The download speeds matter for things where information is primarily coming to you. So if you're streaming movies or television, downloading large files, saving attachments from email, just general web surfing. Anytime you're taking information in from the internet, that's the download. Upload speeds matter for things like remote meetings, Zoom, telehealth, and gaming. Any of those sort of things where you're sending information to the internet, to somebody else. Maine has a standard for what defines broadband internet, and that is 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up. Megabit is abbreviated Mbps. And we don't need to get into the technical details of what that means, but that's the majority of what you'll see when somebody's advertising speeds, Mbps. When you get into the higher speeds, you get into gigabits per second, that's Gbps. So just to throw those things out there right now. So what can you do with these different speeds? Well, at 1 megabit per second, you can browse the web or social media, check email, stream online radio, if anybody still does that, make a VoIP call, that's a phone call that goes over the internet instead of cable or a traditional phone line. Or you could Skype with one person, but you wouldn't do all those at the same time, because you would rapidly run out of bandwidth if you tried to do that. At 5 megabits, you could do standard definition streaming and some high definition videos, and you could do some gaming. So if you're playing World of Warcraft or any of those other games, Fortnite that kids are doing these days. Between 5 and 25, you can then go to working online, you can do remote learning, and you can have more complex meetings involving multiple participants. You can do higher quality video on streaming, and you can do more robust gaming, especially if you have multiple people doing those things in the same household. 25 megabits and above, you can do Netflix in 4K. And that's sort of one of the most demanding things you can do for download speeds. It's just streaming things in super high definition. But again, these are all if you're just one person as an example. And every device that you have on your network is consuming that bandwidth. So if you have 2 people streaming Netflix in 4K, you're going to need 50 megabits per second to do that reliably. So it adds up quite quickly. Broadband works over multiple formats. You can have cable, fiber, satellite. Cellular is a little bit dicey. That really depends. Internet access enters a building through physical connection, either from a utility pole outside in the case of cable or fiber or DSL, if you have DSL, which many do, or a satellite dish like Starlink or HughesNet or things of that nature. You might not have a physical connection. You might just use a wireless hotspot, which connects to a radio antenna from a cellular provider. Once inside the building, your network equipment, thinking routers and modems, are what are responsible for dividing that one internet connection into access for multiple devices, either with wires or just through Wi-Fi. As an example, for the most part, Starlink connections are exclusively Wi-Fi in the home. They have some other things that you can add on, but cable, oftentimes you'll have the modem and the router sitting next to a computer, which would then connect with a wire. There may be a router built in that does wireless. So it's a combination of those different possibilities. Many factors impact the speed that each device is able to achieve, because every single link in the chain has an impact on what the end resulting speed is. So just like a chain, I use the analogy, is only as strong as its weakest link. The internet connection speed that any one device is able to utilize depends on the slowest part between that device and the internet itself. So the Schoodic Peninsula Broadband Committee was formed in 2022 by the combination of the Gouldsboro and the Winter Harbor Broadband Committees. It's comprised of members representing both towns. And the goal is to ensure that all residents and businesses, basically every address in the 2 towns, has access to a high-speed broadband, reliable internet connection. Broadband is a big driver of economic growth, and not only is it something that can attract people to the communities, which not everybody's a fan of attracting new people to communities, but we are a fan of keeping our young people close to home, having an environment that is conducive to them being able to work and thrive in these communities. And that's something that if there's a job that they have to traditionally go out of the area to do, but they can do that remotely. If you have a good, reliable internet connection, you're providing an opportunity for those young people, or people, not even necessarily young, just people who are already here, to be able to continue to do the work here and live and contribute to the community that we'd like to see happen. Can also support remote learning. Hopefully we don't ever have to go full remote. It was a terrible experience, but remote learning can provide opportunities, whether it's for tutoring or other supports for students that just aren't practical to offer in other ways. So if you have a good, robust internet connection, you can use that to facilitate remote learning. Telehealth, I've heard brought up a couple of times tonight by people that walked in earlier. That requires good upload and download speeds to be able to conference with your doctor remotely. And we all know that it's difficult to get FaceTime with literal face-to-face time with practitioners these days. Telehealth is an increasingly important option for people who need healthcare. And you can't do that without a good, strong internet connection. And as always, the things that we do every day with broadband, you need good internet for that. whether it's just Apple FaceTime, Facebook, any sort of communication with families and our communities. So we did a survey last year in both communities. We did them at slightly different times. We received a total of 138 responses. 128 of those responses said they had internet access of some kind. 10 respondents had no internet access at all. Of the 10 who didn't have internet access, they all wanted internet access. The people who had internet reported the following numbers for the types of services that they use. 60 had DSL, so consolidated communications. 41 had cable from Spectrum. 11 used some form of satellite internet, whether it was HughesLink, Starlink, or any other provider. 8 used a mobile hotspot from their cellular service. 1 person used dial-up. And 17 people didn't answer that question. So the speeds that were reported were advertised as low as 0.75 megabits down and 0.76 megabits up. Those are pretty slow advertised speeds. Very easy to deliver on those speeds. That's a very low speed. And they were listed as high as 500 megabits down and 300 megabits up. The people who were able to do speed tests and report their actual speeds that they were getting gave some very different answers. The download speed was as low as half a megabit to 1 megabit, and 0.09 was the slowest upload speed reported. The highest test results, 359 megabits down and 980 megabits up. Now, I didn't look back to find whose survey that was, but I suspect that was a Starlink subscriber. And we can talk a little bit more about Starlink later, but they're sort of an anomaly. They're also very expensive services compared to other services, but they're really, if you have to go a satellite option, they're really the only viable one in many scenarios. So while some services reported very good speeds, only 19 respondents said they had download speeds that met the state's 100 megabits per second down threshold for being broadband, and only 8 had speeds that met 20 megabits up. So out of those 138 respondents, you've only got 8 who actually have something that even at the state at that very low level defines as broadband. As far as what they're paying, some were paying as little as $6 a month and as much as $330 a month. And again, those higher costs are going to be things like Starlink. The median price was $62 a month, and the average price was $70.50. And that includes some estimation there, because not everybody has their bill broken down where it itemizes what's the internet and what's your cable or what's your phone. But that's what people reported as their estimates if it didn't have that. The things that people are doing with their internet, 123 said email, 120 for web browsing, 99 for streaming, 88 for social media, 63 work from home, 48 telehealth, 42 business or home office, 36 remote learning, 30 home surveillance, and 28 had some sort of a smart home component where you might have a thermostat or some other control connected to your network. And those are pretty much answers we were expecting to see from people. As far as the adequacy of the service, half of the respondents said their internet service was inadequate for their current needs. And of those for whom service was inadequate, 51 said the obstacle was that there was nothing better available. 11 said improved service would be too expensive. So going off of this survey data, the committee set a goal of a symmetrical internet connection, which means the same speed down as up of 100 megabits per second, which is where the federal standard is trending towards. I don't believe it's been updated yet, but that's what many people are pushing towards. We also looked at what different options there were for trying to deliver that sort of a speed, and we decided that a fiber-based solution is really the only way to go moving forward, at least because it only gives the guaranteed upgradability and capacity that we're looking for. Everything else that's copper-based is already basically facing the limitations of the medium. So again, a symmetrical connection. For most of the history of the internet, it's been asymmetrical. DSL is asymmetrical, cable service is asymmetrical. Because most of the time people have needed to download more than they've needed to upload. So streaming, again, is a very asymmetrical thing. There's a lot of information coming into your home. Downloading software or music to local devices. So again, asymmetrical, they're normal with DSL, cable, and satellite providers that are based on geostationary orbits for satellite. Starlink is not in the same orbit. They don't have the same delays. Starlink has a much closer thing. So they don't suffer from the same degree of asymmetry. But as uses of the internet expand to include things like work from home, telehealth, remote learning, and this conferencing that we've been growing into over the last few years, the need to upload, to send information out is growing much faster than the need to download has. So that's why symmetrical is important, because remember, if your connection is 500 megabits down and 20 megabits up, and you have 4 kids doing remote learning at the same time, they're dividing up that 20 megabits up amongst themselves. And it very quickly reaches a point where it's not going to be a stable connection. So that larger upload is more important than it used to be. Why fiber? Fiber optic cables are already the methods used to create the backbone of the internet as we know it, because they carry the most bandwidth with the least degradation over the longest distances. For local uses, fiber has also become more affordable. As time goes on, especially recently, prices are going up for everything right now, but fiber is much more affordable locally than it used to be. It's lightweight and it won't add a lot of strain to the utility poles that are in place. And right now, there's really no known limit to how much bandwidth it can carry, because it's about the technology on either end of that fiber. As that technology improves, we can add more and more data through that fiber. So the downsides to fiber are primarily, if you get a tree fall on it and it breaks, you have a more difficult time to reestablish that connection than you would with copper. But it's the same setup. If you have a break in the fiber, you have to repair it. Same with any other medium. So they're similar to the other drawbacks that any cable can have. So there are some options to expand broadband in our area. The 2 basic models are to engage with an internet service provider like Consolidated Communications or Spectrum to have them build and operate this fiber network for the 2 towns. Or there's the option to build a network municipally that is owned by the towns and have some model by which they provide service to the customers directly. And of course, there's always the option to just sit back and let the internet providers do what they do until they decide they want to improve service sharing. So the first option is engage with the ISP. That's the simplest route. There's very little work on behalf of the towns if we want to go this way. The ISP would design and build the network, which they would then operate. The people who have service with them would be customers of the internet provider. In the current environment, the town would still be responsible for finding funding sources, some of which can be grant money that's available right now. And anything that's not grant funded could be borrowed either through just municipal loans or bonds. But ultimately, control of that network belongs with the internet provider. And the future expansion and improvements to it also rest with that internet provider. And the subscriptions that you pay to that internet provider, they go out, And you hope that someday some portion of that comes back in the form of new investment. So we did, as a committee, a request for information in late 2022. We sent that out to existing ISPs in the area. And we did get 2 responses. One was from Consolidated Communications, and we got a response from Axiom. So Consolidated Communications offers their Fidium fiber service as it's what they're rolling out in this area in various communities. They did in Eastbrook already, and to preempt the question that we got last time, Eastbrook paid them to come out and put that service in. Eastbrook had revenue from the wind farm, and they put that money towards expanding internet. So there is fiber to every home in Eastbrook right now because of that. That wasn't grant funded. They decided they wanted to put that money towards that. Axiom Technologies is a Maine-based company. They're based further down east, and they build and operate network for municipalities and other areas as well. They did Hammond somewhat recently. The other side of the coin, the municipally owned model, is more complicated, but it does give you local control, which I know is something that's important to a lot of people. You might contract with an internet service provider to design and build the network, or you could approach some other company that is specialized in that to actually build out your fiber network. The towns then, either on their own or as part of a collaborative, are responsible for operating that network, maintaining it, and improving it over time. They would still be responsible for identifying funding sources, whether it's grant funding, which again is available right now, or by taking out debt or backing debt. And we'll get into an example of this later. The subscription fees from the customers on a municipally owned network would go to pay for the internet service and pay back any debt that was taken out to build the network, and they pay for the maintenance of the network. And if any amount that you have left over can be returned to the towns as revenue. So the example of this model is the Down East Broadband Utility, which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It started in Calais and Baileyville in 2018. And they've since added a number of other towns. They have a dark fiber open access network. Dark fiber is a technical term for they're just a fiber network. They aren't the service that runs over. Open access meaning that multiple internet providers are available and can compete for your business on it. They're expanding to Cooper and Princeton, as it shows there. And we've looked quite closely at their model, and it'd be very, very feasible, I think, to duplicate that model or to potentially join with them. And there are reasons why we might do one or the other. But their first internet provider is Pioneer Broadband, and that's the company that built out their network and also presently maintains the network. They're just adding their second provider now. Their base package for internet service is 100 megabits per second, symmetrical, so 100 up, 100 down, and it's $60 a month. They have packages up to 1 gigabit per second, so 1,000 megabits. And that's, at the last time I looked, that was about $120 a month, 125. So of that 60, and it doesn't matter which package you choose, whether it's the $60 a month package or one of the higher packages, $25 a month is returned to Down East Broadband per customer to pay back the loans, pay for DBU's network operator, and fund a maintenance reserve. They presently have 1,000 customers. They're adding more every day. The limiting factor right now is Pioneer Broadband doesn't have enough technicians to sign up and activate the service at all the customers as fast as they could. And they've only lost customers because people move out of the area. Nobody's switched because they weren't happy with the service or they found it was too pricey. So they began serving their customers in 2019. And these are the years that the other towns joined in. And each of those towns voted to join Down East Broadband. There was a network build out. And then once that network was complete, people were able to sign up and start receiving service. There are some hybrids of these models that are possible to do. In the responses from Axiom and Consolidated, both companies indicated that they were open to build and turn over control of the network. But those models included things like a 20-year exclusivity agreement. So that if Consolidated builds the network and turns it over to you, they're the only game in town for the next 20 years. Then you can bring somebody else on. So it's not that we couldn't do that, it's just one more level of restriction. And always the big question is, what would this cost? Well, we're working on getting some cost estimating done for this project right now with the consultants that are working with the Maine Connectivity Authority. And more of this will come out in the request for proposals process. But on the customer side, Fidium customers right now can get an introductory rate of $70 a month, plus user fees, for 1 gigabit service. That's not too bad. In addition to that, regardless of who's the internet provider, there's assistance for low-income and elderly households with the Affordable Connectivity Program. You can get a $30 a month credit for your bill for eligible households. So in the case, if you had the $60 a month package and you're eligible for this program, you could actually see your cost fees as low as $30 a month for 100 megabit symmetrical service. That's just a little piece that's out there right now that's available for anybody. And that's available if you're on Spectrum, if you're on DSL, if you're an eligible customer. It's worth looking into the program. And I should have mentioned this, if there are questions, you don't have to hold them to the end. Shoot up your hand and I'll gladly take your question. If you're on Zoom, I can't see you, but feel free to shout out. So why not let the internet service providers do it themselves? For one, we know there are customers in need of improved service right now. And existing internet providers like Spectrum and Consolidated are generally only going to invest in communities where they see a quick return on investment. Which is why they're very happy to work with us right now when there's grant money available, because it makes it much more likely a project can happen and get funded quickly. For rural areas like this one, that makes expansion and improvement a very slow process. The grant money, as I said, exists, but that could take decades if we just leave it in the hands of the internet providers. This grant money has to go through communities to get to the internet providers. That was a change in the last few years. It used to be the case that the government would put up grants that the internet providers could go apply for and say, we're going to expand service in this area. And they could do the minimum possible to say that they did it, they get the money.
Do you have people, Roy, to write grants for this town? Our town doesn't write grants, so we would need someone to write for us.
So one of the things, the Maine Connectivity Authority has a lot of consultants that are doing that sort of work as well. And so they're sort of streamlining the process. There are so many towns doing this in their own different stages that it's been very helpful to sort of streamline and consolidate and just identify a process. And that's why Maine Connectivity Authority has all these consultants to sort of make that process a lot easier. And then lastly, you're never sure what that actual ISP driven expansion is going to look like, if it will meet the needs of the community in the near term or the long. So that's why we feel it's best to take an active stance on this. So as far as next steps, we're working, as I said, with consultants to draft an RFP, which will be more specific. We'll get into the network design and the build costs. The April outreach meeting showed a very strong preference for the municipally owned model. Of everybody who answered the question at that meeting, everybody preferred municipally owned. Nobody said, let's go with the internet service provider group. That sentiment is being incorporated into this RFP. We are open to all models, but there's a demonstrated strong preference for municipally owned.
Roy,
Jim?
so when you say municipally owned, so the Callis model is a not-for-profit
It's not,
organization.
it's not for profit. In the Downey's broadband model, the towns are actually, and this is something that we could decide here if we wanted to do the same, we wanted to do differently. The towns themselves actually own the network that exists in the town. Downey's broadband is simply the operator of that network. And that's a not-for-profit organization. Their income comes from the user fees, the $25 a month. They send the money out to pay for the loans that Callis, Baileyville, the others backed to build the network. And I would add in their model, they are solvent. They have more money coming in than is required to pay the loans. So they are on the positive side in that one.
Right, but this, again, just follow it up, so, like here, you know, Steuben, Boothborough, Winter Harbor.
Yep.
How do you tie in Sullivan? How do you tie in 4 or 5 municipalities?
So, good question. I don't know if everybody's familiar with this term, but the 3-ring binder is likewise a dark fiber corridor that runs, I'm not sure where it comes in, but it runs along Route 1 in Hancock up to Tideway Market. It follows 182 into Franklin, comes back down 200 in Sullivan back to Route 1, continues along Route 1 all the way through Millbridge, I believe. That is the fiber backbone that was installed by the state. I don't know if it was the state or some state agency several years ago. So to tie into this, all a community has to do is have their network connect to this 3-ring binder. And that provides them the gateway, if you will, to the broader internet over that fiber network. So what Downey's broadband does, they have their own internal networks and it connects to that 3-ring binder to get to the internet. So that's the physical part of it. So all that is required is to just build that network in your community with the appropriate networking hardware to be able to interface with the 3-ring binder. And that's something like a small telecommunications building, something 10 by 20 feet. It plugs into the network, and then any internet service provider that we would contract with, not even contract with, but with which we would negotiate the ability for them to serve on our network, could then activate service to any one of the customers who is in these 2 communities. And the goal is, I think I said before, that every address in either town would have this running by the road in front of them. There are some details about, getting from the road to the driveway, especially if you've got some long driveways, and there are some people here with some really long driveways. But that's a negotiating piece that has to happen here. In the Downey's broadband example, I think it's the first quarter mile or 1,200 feet are included in the installation. If you've got longer than that, there might be an additional cost to get that fiber from the road to your house. But again, those are parts of the negotiating process. Question back here.
Yeah, who did the town have to manage all this, like just
No,
picking up customers and making sure?
no,
I
and
have a complaint that my system isn't working.
right.
You do it or the town?
It probably won't be made, but the Downey's broadband, again, going back to their model, they have 1 employee. They have a volunteer board in their setup. Every town that is part of Downey's broadband has 1 member on the board of directors, and they're volunteer. They don't get any compensation. I feel pretty good about my $25 a meeting, on the committees that I serve on. They don't get anything. They have one employee, that's the network operator. And that's the person who's responsible for fielding calls for service. Somebody, there's a tree down or there's something going on like that. They call, in their model, Pioneer Broadband, and they dispatch the repair. It's that one person.
Is that enough to adequately cover this service on the scale of the whole community?
Well, they still have just the one network operator for their 5 or so communities. And that's worked out very well for them so far. One of the obstacles to us simply jumping in and joining with them is we are so geographically distant from Calais and Baileyville that it would be impossible for a single network operator to cover that whole stretch. So they would have to hire another network operator. So in some ways, it almost makes sense for us to do it over here. Now, if we did this model and we wanted, and we're successful, and there are neighboring communities, for example, Steuben, Sullivan, if they decided they wanted to join in as well, then it's certainly up to us to say yes or no. But the more communities that we have, the further it defrays that cost of that network operator.
And you're not just dumping a big pile of administrative work on a community.
No,
Yeah, that's good.
no. Basically, again, in their model, the towns of Bailey and Calais, what they did initially, and they were really the driving force behind this. The towns recognized that they had a need. They saw this as a solution and they pushed this model. The extent of the town's involvement is really backing the debt. They borrowed on behalf of the nonprofit, and then the nonprofit pays them back for that. And that's the extent of the town's involvement directly.
Good.
Is there another question over here?
Do the local libraries have fiber at their library? I see they do.
I believe that fiber is available, and that would be provided, I'm pretty sure, through the Main State Library Network, that,
We do have fiber right down.
there is fiber in place. I'm pretty sure it's Consolidated fiber, because Scudic Institute is a customer of
They
Consolidated.
switched, it was, with the cable company, and then they switched. Contractor.
Yeah. And I would say, Scudic Institute, we have a 40 megabit symmetrical connection. Now, 40 is not a big amount, especially for a campus that size.
Yeah.
We pay $600 a month. Obviously, we didn't answer this. And and they're really not interested in selling the fiber they've already got. They're interested in putting in video. So they're not even planning on using the existing fiber. Whatever they want to build, they're gonna put a new fiber. So whatever happens will be new going up on the poles. And long-term, I think even Spectrum, we're going to see right now, they have, Bob, hybrid fiber cable, basically, is what, it's been, I don't know if it's in place or if that's what they're deploying, but long-term, fiber is really the future because copper is limited, no matter what you do.
As you know, I don't have any utility poles, my driveway's 1,300 feet long, I think they would run it down.
I think that whether it's the first 1,000 feet is built in, and then there's some negotiation on the last 300. When we talked to the CEO of Pioneer Broadband, he said he has personally dragged fiber through the woods, Consolidated in their RFP, they discussed micro trenching, which I assume is a fancy term for digging a low channel and just running it underground. I think there are options, and I don't think in any case that it's going to be prohibitively costly for those sort of fringe cases. I think in the long run, we would find, I've heard the horror stories when the Spectrum says, okay, yeah, we'll run cable to your house, it'll be $9,000. we're not talking that. Though in the consolidated model, was it? I don't remember what their RFP said. They actually gave a price for micro trenching per foot. And I forget what it was, but it was not, that one was not a good number. It wouldn't take long for that to add up to big amounts either. So again, these are all parts that need to be negotiated with whoever is building the network. And to that point, the ideal scenario is, as much as possible, if we know that we have customers, if we decide to go this route, we know we have customers who want to join and subscribe to this service, it's going to be important to know that upfront, because then those installations can be built into the initial network build. That's what they try to do. They try and add as many people who know they want to be part of this right up front. Because otherwise, when you go to sign up a new person, then you've got to mobilize again a little bit.
So Roy, back to the dark ring, the three ring. So would we have to run infrastructure like Brad, towards the end of Gouldsboro Point? Would we have to run it to where we put our consolidated building, or can we tie into the dark ring at the fiber that's there at Gouldsboro Point and Route 1?
So it can go either way. It just depends on what makes the most sense for the design. And one of the parts of this RFP is going to be getting a high level design, which will be basically saying, okay, this is what we think the layout would look like. We could have multiple points at which we tie into the three ring binder. That's a possibility. Certainly, I think the common thing in Down East Broadband, they actually have two central offices per town, or at least the first towns they did two. So there'll be 2 points where it joins the three ring binder. They think now that maybe that's a little bit excessive, that they could get away with one central office per town. But what that would mean, Gouldsboro is a very long vertical community, as is Sioux Bend. There's not a lot of frontage on Route 1 by comparison to how much there is south of that. So whether it's one central office or two, there's going to be a lot of fiber runs going down the main corridors. So Gouldsboro Point Road, West Bay Road, probably not Pond Road, because there's that gap in the middle where there's absolutely no utilities. But South Gouldsboro Road, those would be your main corridors that would carry this fiber down into the villages and all the way to, Crowley Island Road and into Korea. So that's sort of, again, that's part of the network design, that's part of the RFP process. And that's sort of where Sandy.
Wanted to eventuate the three ring binder and the importance of where it's coming from for major homes.
Well, yes, there is that point that if we want to put fiber into Winter Harbor, we have to go through Gouldsboro. There's no two ways about it. And that's one of the reasons why we felt it was important back in January of 22 to really look at this as a peninsula-wide project, not just one community or another.
We won't charge you.
So again, we're working with those consultants. We're working on the RFP now. We did the outreach in April. We're going to do one more outreach meeting. We'll touch on that a little bit more. Certainly, we want your input. If you feel like there's a model that you think best fits what you would envision for this community, these two communities, this is your chance. I'll ask the question.
Best scenario, what would be the timeline to running wire up in poles and connecting up people? We're talking 2 years, we're talking a year, 8 months.
So the process is a little bit better than when DBU started it. Because back when they started putting their process together in 2018. I think 2020 they went live, or 2019 they went live with some customers. Their big obstacles at the time was the whole licensing. That has smoothed out significantly since they did their first round of their build. So it could be once we have approval, once we have funding, once we hit the switch and tell trucks to start rolling and start installing, it could be within a year that we start offering service. And a little bit more on that timeline is coming up. But I'll just ask the question right now, is there a sense from people that you like the community, the municipally owned model over the ISP model? See a show of hands.
Who maintains that? You said it's more difficult, to fix the cables and stuff.
Yep, so again, the network operator is the first point of contact, so if there's a problem, they get notified and then they dispatch to, in Downey's broadband model, Pioneer Broadband maintains their network. So the network operator then pushes the service off to Pioneer goes and repairs, and they have the technician that maintains the fiber.
So is Pioneer in this case working as a subcontractor then for Downey's?
Essentially, they are contracted with Downey's Broadband to provide their maintenance.
So looking at worst case scenarios, Pioneer's CEO spends all the money and goes to Jamaica and they fold.
Yep.
What are see, that's
Yeah.
the part that's the gear that, you know,
Yeah, then you
you
have
do
to,
all this and now we don't have an internet, we don't have a technical side.
it's a reasonable concern, certainly anything can happen, absolutely. I would say that in their case, that's one specific case that's not likely. They're adding technicians, they're growing as a business, and they have a pretty robust model, and I think
Yeah,
it's severe negligence, it's an extreme case, but yeah, there have to be,
Just like,
alternatives.
I mean, PERC, we have a good example of municipalities getting together, it's going on the auction block this month.
Pioneer is certainly not the only game in that space in the state, and it's a matter through this RFP process. It's my hope that we'll be able to make contact with other companies that are qualified to build out networks and do the same kind of work. There are others than Pioneer certainly. And it's just, that's who Down East has chosen to work with.
I assume they do like multi-year contracts, or do they have to put it out for bid every year?
I would assume it's probably a multi-year contract. That's actually not a question we've gone over with them, but that's again, something that we would need to have in writing on any sort of these
But
projects.
then again, how often can they jerk the rates?
Yeah.
Not that.
Yeah.
Some of the unit, have already done this,
Yeah.
$20 to get in, and a year later, you're paying $140.
Yeah, and to that point, one of the things I know that we've had in discussion with MCA, they talked about communities where one of the things that they negotiate is a price lock for 10 years. So those are all different things that are part of this negotiation when we're trying to come up with this arrangement.
We have an estimated forecast in footprint here, how many subscribers we would have.
I don't have how many subscribers. I know we have the census data showing how many people, and certainly there's, some math you can do, some extrapolation there. That's again, part of that RFP process, coming up with the estimates. We know we have somewhere between 80 and 90 road miles between the two towns that very likely we have to have fiber along the majority of those sections. So those finer details, that's part of the pro forma that goes into the estimating. It says, okay, this is how many people or how many addresses would be eligible, that they actually could get service. How many of those do we need? Well, we need for a take rate to make this so that we're not spending tax dollars to pay back the loans. So that's all part of this stage that we're in right now, is that estimating.
Roy, is this done, the one who, I try to keep everything straight, they were unable to hook up all the people that were wishing to be hooked up there.
Yeah, they have people waiting to be connected.
Well, then we had 3 or 4 more towns that.
But again, that's, they're working with Pioneer. There's no guarantee that we'd be working with Pioneer. That's their setup. I know Pioneer has some work that they've done in this area. They do have some customers and some network that they built in this area, but it's not a guarantee. And they're working to increase their capacity. Like everybody, they're short staffed for the amount of work they have to do.
Has the other town had any, says, my example, I put in a new house and bring in landline, I had a guaranteed 3-year that I would stay with 3 years for internet stuff. Is there a buyback to help pay if I were to quit them and go with our program? Is there a help pay my release?
So to break the contract, that's not something that we've discussed yet, but it's certainly something that would be on the table for discussion. And we would want to, I mean, that would certainly increase the cost, and probably that, I'm just guessing, that might not be eligible for grant funding to have that kind of an expense. That would be a local cost that we would take on to do that, but it's certainly something that could be discussed. And
Some companies do that all the time. You go one company, will be the other guys.
yeah. On the other hand, those cell phone companies are well established.
So just more of the same, if, you know, you get a big winter storm, it blows down 3 or 4 poles in town.
Mhm.
Consolidate, put it all back together, or each service factor to get.
Well, I would expect whoever owns the utility pole would first put up their poles, but then it would be most likely incumbent on whoever's service is running there to reattach their lines. And that would be whoever we contract with for that maintenance. And I know I mentioned it before, but one of the things that Down East Broadband, again, they've got that $25 per month per customer coming in. So roughly right now, they're receiving about $25,000 a month. Some of that goes to pay the loans back in all the towns. Some of it goes to pay their network operator, and certainly right now, the remainder of that is going into fund the maintenance reserve. They carry insurance as well, but they also have that maintenance reserve so they can pay for those repairs as they come up. They've had a few of those happen. They've been reasonably minor.
Well, you could expect their customer to get your service back at the same time you got your phone back.
I can't speak to that. I've asked Dan Sullivan of Down East Broadband what their mean time to repair is. He hasn't been able to give me an exact figure, but he said it was very quick. So I would assume it's on par with what they've had, because he said Pioneer has been very responsive, has been able to dispatch their technicians to repair the service very quickly.
Or instead of repair, if we lose the power down here, will the service like phone will still work, landline will still work if we lose our power?
Right.
Will fiber still work if we lose power?
So
And if
inside,
cable, lose power, cable goes up.
right, inside this network central office, there would be some battery backup. I would expect it would also have generators. So as long as that is all in place on that end, the service would still be active. It's not electrical, obviously, it's fiber, it's pulses of light. As long as there's some sort of battery backup on the customer end as well, you would have uninterrupted service. I'll just add that because, some people would be looking at this, and some people may have already cut the cord with their traditional utilities. So maybe they're just doing television through streaming, maybe they're doing phone through digital phone with Spectrum. You can do the same thing with fiber. Pioneer offers a phone package as well. So that's an added cost because it's not just the internet, but it works over that same fiber service. So if you're a person who likes to have a landline, you have that possibility with this. This would be a VoIP phone, like I mentioned earlier. So you can do all those things with this service that you would be able to do with Spectrum. It would all be through one connection. Go ahead.
Does there need to be some percentage commitment on the part of prospective users before before you can maintain the kinds of monthly fees that are possible. I mean, what if the results are not great in terms of people committing to?
And that's a part of the estimation that's gonna happen in this process that we're working on now, is figuring out what take rate we need. How many people do we need to be able to make this sustainable? Part of that question is gonna be, what is the grant funding available? The current round of grant funding is the most flexible. Basically, it would be usable for most of the sections of the network that we're talking about. Most of the areas in both Winter Harbor and Gouldsboro would be eligible for the current round of grant funding. And if we're able to maximize that to our advantage, basically the match for the communities right now on this round is 25%. So say your network cost is $3 million. The local part of that might only be $750,000 that would have to be borrowed and financed, and the rest of it could be grant money. Then you have to take that 750, figure out how many years, what you need to pay back, and that will really tell you, assuming we get similar terms to Down East Broadband, that it's $25 a month per customer. That will tell us, roughly what the network operator will cost. We want to put some money away for maintenance. We'll know how much we need to get in on a monthly basis, pay the loans, pay the network operator, pay the maintenance reserve, and that will tell us what the take rate needs to be. Optimistically, we would want to see, I think, one of the people we talked to, it might have even been the CEO of Pioneer, said in a scenario where you have no competition, you would want to see a 50% take rate. And in a scenario where you have competition, so the spectrum and the consolidated, that you should expect or plan for like a 33% take rate of the entire swath of your potential customer base. So that's something that's part of this initial round of estimating that's going to be going on. And that will tell us if this is going to be a feasible project or not. And if it's not, then we have to say to the communities, yes, it's a risk. There's always that risk. If you don't hit your target, yes, the community, if you take out the loan, you got to pay it back. There might be some taxes that have to go to support that initially until your take rate comes up and can overcome that initial shortfall. I saw a question here.
Yeah, if it's, the $750,000 is involved from the town. I'm assuming it has to go to town meeting.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be tomorrow.
It wouldn't be tomorrow. Yeah. And that's just a number that I pull out of thin air just for discussion purposes.
Do these other towns have a price for a seasonal, suspended, like I have cable, in the summertime, I pay like $80, and wintertime, I pay like 20.
Yeah. So that would be certainly something, again, I keep going back to this point, that's part of the negotiating process, because Callis and Baileyville may not have a whole big seasonal resident community. We certainly do have seasonal needs here. And that would be something that with whatever internet provider that we would engage with, we would need to negotiate the terms of any sort of seasonal rates. Jen?
Roy, does the state have any requirement to the Spectrum's consolidated trail runner? That they have to report to the state on how many customers are serving with broadband now? Or are we just guessing on what consolidated Spectrum and that are providing?
I'm not sure that they have any requirement to report on that. That's certainly something that we can look into. There's a lot of very tight-lipped behavior when it comes to these types of networks. Even just trying to figure out a list of the polls, it's virtually impossible to get. It's protected information that they don't share. So, I mean, we can physically walk up to the pole, take a picture of it, hammer something onto it. But they won't tell us that that pole exists. So that's, you know, that's how tight that they are with a lot of this information.
Oh, he does you as a
A little tag on it.
tag on it now, you scan his tag.
But it's just,
Most of the phone.
I'm not sure if it's one utility over another, but it's definitely the existing utility. So.
Most of the poles are
Consolidated or.
not, I think they're, I know Hillsborough Point consolidated the secondary, because we lost the pole, we had to wait for Versant to come and replace the pole. And then we had to wait for consolidated to kind of be hooked up there.
And that would make sense.
With the poles.
The one major exception to that, I know that the Civic Institute are owned by the National Parks. But, and that's its own kettle of fish. But
Right, with respect to telephone poles, the tag on it tells you the owners of the pole.
the tag tells you, okay.
And the poles and the
And
whole.
what's taken on it, fine, so the
Mhm.
type of work that's being used.
And I don't think that in the long run, that's gonna be a huge determining factor, but it certainly will matter when it comes time, you know, if somebody hits a pole and it goes down and needs replaced, then it's gonna matter whose pole it is, right?
This is probably wrong, but is there any reason it would make sense to have this all on a state level? That, I mean, it's redundant, having every set up its own system.
There are plenty of good reasons why it might make sense to do that, but the way the funding is set up right now, it's to go through these small community-driven efforts. Because the logic was that federally, the community knows what it needs better than the higher level organizations.
Does that mean it's going to be a cheaper price per company?
So again, you know, the pricing is all to be negotiated with the internet provider. But again, at the DBU model, they've got 60 a month for their base package. That's not to say that that's what ours would be if we did this, but that's the example that we have to look at right now to compare. We know what the average prices, median prices were reported, and that's in line with or a little bit better than what was reported by our survey. So for some people, certainly it would be an increase. For many people, it would be a decrease. And then that's just if you want the base package. You always have the option to go with one of the higher packages offered by the provider. So
That's competitive with spectrum consolidation.
yeah, for example, with promotional pricing, I just signed up a couple months ago with Spectrum for their 500 meg over 20 service, because they don't offer anything better on the upload side. And that's $60 a month. Now that's internet and phone together. That's a promotional price. That's good for 1 year. And then it's gonna go up 20% next year, and who knows where it goes from there. But certainly I would say that, and that's a point that I meant to mention earlier. Your need for bandwidth is really what should drive what package you're going for. Now, me, my wife, just the two of us in one household with 500 megabits down, we never get close to saturating that connection. That 500 megabits down for a couple like us, that's just marketing. It's saying, we can give you this because we know you're not going to use it. We would have to be watching Netflix in 4K on 25 different 75-inch TVs to saturate that connection. So having a big number like 500 megabits, if you're not going to use it, means nothing. But having 100 megabit over 100 megabit, if you're going to need to do teleconferencing or telehealth or remote learning or any sort of thing that requires a lot of upload, that's more valuable than having 500 down and 20 up. And that's the numbers game. That's the marketing side of it. And a lot of people will see the 500 down and they'll think, oh, this is great service. But if you're not using it, it means nothing. If you're using it to check your email, you're getting no more benefit out of that than a 20 megabit down service. So. So is there anybody that prefers to let the internet providers do it themselves? That's what
They only wanted $25,000 to run cable to my house for 2-1.
I mean, I'm sure it'd be worth every penny. So again, we'll have one more outreach meeting and we'll probably have slightly more information than this as we get further into the RFP process. But if you signed up and left us your email, I can add you into the MailChimp mailing that I send out periodically here. And we can get you that updated information. You don't necessarily have to come back to this. We do want to make sure we have something in the summer because there's probably a few more people who haven't arrived yet. And this will be valid for them too. So that summer outreach meeting will be sort of targeting those folks. If there are better days and times that work for people, certainly, have them get in touch with us so we can try and schedule it on a night that works better for people. Also, it's a little oddball sitting there, additional committee members. We've lost a few members in our committee. We have room for a couple more. The people that are interested, let us know. We try to meet monthly on a regular schedule. It's just, you lose a few people, sometimes it's hard to have a functioning committee. So,
What night are you meeting now? What night are you meeting now?
most recently, we have done, is it Wednesdays?
Wednesdays, 4
At 4 o'clock. But we can also modify that time to, if we find something that works better for the committee as a whole. So that's just something I put out there. It would be helpful to have. Timeline, August is when the application opens for this next round of funding. And again, this is the most flexible one we're going to see in the near future. The one that happens after this is more restrictive. It has, it would not be eligible. There would not be as many addresses and sections of the towns that are eligible for the next round of funding. We really want to try and hit this August date. What we'll need to do, we will need to have this RFP complete, send it out, get responses, evaluate them, have special town meetings, and approve borrowing if we want to take advantage of this next round of funding. And so it's going to be an ambitious timeline. If we go the municipally owned route, we have to create an interlocal agreement between these two towns and set up a nonprofit to do it if we want to follow the DBU model. So there's a lot to happen in the next few months if we want to go this route. So I would say most important is to spread the word, let people know about this. Because certainly we think it's important to get a project in these two communities. If it's, regardless of what kind of project, if it's municipally owned or internet providers, we know there's a need and we want to make this project happen. We need community support to do that.
Do you have copies of their interlocal agreement and how their nonprofit was set up over there?
We do. Yeah.
So we're not reinventing the wheel.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We would still want to have, whether it's one of the town's lawyers or some lawyer that we contract with, we would give them the doc and say, make this for us, and they can basically use that as a template. Exactly. So. Any other questions?
So not a question, Roy, but Roy, Mike, Bob, everybody else. For the community member, I just want to say is we really appreciate you guys taking the time to do all this research.
Absolutely.
Our presentation took 20 hours to put together and all that, so we do appreciate you guys going out on a limb for the rest of us, so that, we can move forward on it.
Thank you. We do have a website. It's go to broadband.org in case you can't see it. It's not fancy, but it's where we post the agendas for the meetings, where we post the archive minutes, and I'm going to work on putting links up there for YouTube channel so you can see the meetings if you really want to have something to fall asleep to. The recording of this meeting will be up there soon as well, so that anybody who missed it tonight can go ahead and have a look and see what you all saw tonight.
Excuse me, will you post on that website the RFP that you?
Yeah.
Drafted on the.
Basically, I think any document that we're gonna create going forward will probably be available up there in some way, shape, or form. This set of slides I will also post up there, so if anybody wants to grab this. There's a sign up sheet on the website, so if you want to share that around people, if they want information, they can sign up there, and we'll add them into the mailing list as well.
Maybe take an extra flyer and share with a neighbor or your select.
You are Roy, are you? My name is Jerry Brown. I'm told. Different stuff completely, but he's weird to me.
Yes, she mentioned that.
That shouldn't have been. You assume he gave me the word. I'll say it in email. Correction for you.
Absolutely.
Sure. Not a problem. That's really great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right, thank you for coming out.
Sure.
Right, sure. What's up? Up here in the summer, I do nothing. Cosmos Nights Network. In fact, you're. Okay, like telephone numbers on the. It's coming out. Sure. All right, well, thank you very much. Yeah, if you want, just put a little note by your name and. The one I would expect, your name, if something goes wrong, or something, and that's his job, and he has an expectation that he's gonna get sometimes called. But again, that's that structure, that's something that you have to identify. All right, thank you for coming out.
Right, there, this is before the fair. Right.